What are LEI and POP codes and what is their purpose? So LEI stands for Legal Entity Identifier and POP stands for Purpose of Payment Code. So a legal entity identifier is used to uniquely identify the organisation or person to whom money is being sent. So it would be something like, if it was a person, it'd be like a passport number or a citizenship ID. If it was an organisation, it'd be something like a local company registration ID or a tax ID. There is also a global database being created that will have legal entity identifiers in it, so it could also be that. A purpose of payment code is slightly different. It's actually a code that's supposed to define the type of payment that you're making. So it's selected from a list of sort of ISO standard payment codes or payment type codes, which runs into the many hundreds, right? It's really granular, very detailed. So as an example might be that if you are completing let's say a property transaction, within that payment, within a single payment, you might be paying some money which is a fee to an advisor, some money which is an amount to purchase a property, some money which is tax. Each of those, so there would be 3 different purpose of payment codes. So the reason why these are being added into messages is primarily so that regulators and banks can better understand what money movement is for kind of financial crime, monitoring, anti-money laundering. So you can imagine there are certain types of payment that are higher risk, and so they're going to hone in on those, and then the legal entity identifiers allow them to really understand better who money is moving to and from. Are there standard POP and LEI codes, and if so, where can you get them? For LEIs, there's no kind of global database of legal entity identifiers. It is being created as we speak. So there are different data providers in different countries where you kind of need to speak to your bank to sort of understand, well, what are they going to accept as a legal entity identifier? Because, for example, a local company number might be sufficient. So unfortunately, there's no easy answer for legal entity identifiers. It is kind of a complex thing that you've got to go and get sort of customer, beneficiary by beneficiary, depending on what works in that country and depending what bank you're working with. Purpose of payment codes is a bit easier. Okay, so there is an ISO standard for purpose of payment codes. It runs to many hundreds of purpose of payment codes. There's a lot of them. Each country and each payment scheme has then reduced that down to a list that they're going to use. So that's the good news, is that the list is reduced depending on which country and payment scheme you're using. The bad news is that each of them have a slightly different set of purpose of payment codes. So, for example, in the UK, if you're say, for example, looking at chaps, there are a set of purpose of payment codes defined for that. We actually have a link to it in the ISO 20022 area of our website. So will all banks use the same LEI and POP codes, or will they differ? They're going to differ. They're going to differ by bank. And so actually there's different layers. So each country has its own view of what sort of purpose of payment codes it wants to use and how it wants to approach the process of legal entity identification. So that's at a country level, so depending on where you're sending the money to. But then on top of that, you've got the banks that you're working with, and each bank will have its view of how it wants data sort of segmented in terms of purpose of payment codes, and how it wants to deal with legal entity identifiers. So you're gonna have this a mix of both of those things that you're gonna have to deal with. So you're gonna need to speak to your bank, understand what the bank requires, and part of that will be a bank specific, and part of it will be based on the country you're trying to make the payment in. So will LEI and POP codes differ for different payment types? Mostly no is going to be the answer. However, you need to watch out for particular types of payments that can only be either high value or low value. So an example would be FX settlement, which typically tends to be millions of pounds. So that's always going to be a chaps payment, and the code you're only ever going to use because it's a chaps payment, because there's a specific code for FX settlements. So like I said, the short answer is no, but the devil's in the detail.